اللهم لبيك لبيك لا شريك لك لبيك إن الحمد والنعمة لك والملك لا شريك لك لبيك لبيك اللهم.
MashaAllah. We'll start recite the first chapter of Qur'an, which is Al-Fatiha, the opening.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.
Rule of the book. The phenomenon of the Qur'an. It is a miracle and its effect on humans. This is our topic today. It's such an important topic, such a great topic by a great speaker who is Abdullah al Andalusi. Abdullah al Andalusi is an international speaker on Islam and Muslim affairs. He defends Islamic orthodoxy from a rational basis and follow Islamic opinion within the mainstream Sunnah wal Jamaah, the Sunni schools of thought. Abdullah was a former Christian of Portuguese descent. Abdullah al Andalusi embraced Islam at a young age after a period of study that started when he was 10 years old. He has continued to study Islam in depth ever since. Abdullah has had a long experience of working in the Muslim community, and his activities involve studying and talking extensively on Islamic revivalism, theology, philosophy, the philosophy of science, psychology, anthropology, and political philosophy. Abdullah has therefore talked on Shariah, Secularism, Liberalism, and the miracle of Qur'an throughout the UK and internationally. He has spoken in community, university, colleagues, and numerous appearances on various programs on TV channels including ITV, BBC Arabic, Base TV, Islam Channel, and Iqra TV. He also has engaged in a number of debates with atheists, secularists, and Christians on a variety of topics from theology to political philosophy. In 2009, he co-founded the Public Discussion Forum, the Muslim Debate Initiative, a forum that promotes open dialogue and critical debates between thinkers, academics, and public speakers of all backgrounds. Please welcome our speaker today, Abdullah al Andalusi. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you, brother, for the introduction. Thank you to the ISOC here and to Phyllis South for inviting me for this interesting topic. I'm not a great speaker, I just have great ideas, and none of them belong to me. So I just call people to them, namely Islam. Now, this is a very interesting subject, phenomenon of the Quran. There is a lot that can be said about the Quran, and unfortunately I will not be able to do justice to the book within 45 minutes. I've requested 1 hour for this lecture because there's a lot of things I'd like to draw your attention to about the Quran which you might not be aware of, and it might be something that will give you some concrete ideas as to some of the wonderful and amazing aspects of this book and how it was able to affect a civilization. In this presentation, first I'll discuss how we're going to begin this investigation into the phenomenon of the Quran, looking at its content, then looking at the form of the content, so it's the manner it is presented in, and of course then going to the effect of the Quran, and then looking at or answering the question as to what is the origins of the Quran. As scientists know, examining the nature of an effect will give you an indication of its cause. So if you look at gravity, electric charge, magnetic fields, these things are forces. And as you know, anyone who studies forces or studies physics will know that forces emanate from objects interacting with each other. There is a cause for the force. So if you detect a force, then there is a source for that force of some kind. So when in the case of gravity, it is mass, for example, or with magnetic fields, it is two different magnetic poles generated by perhaps magnetic objects or fields produced by solar radiation, things like this. Now, when we look at miracles, these are the causes which lie beyond the universe. We want to come up with a definition of what is a miracle. So we will say that it's the cause that lies beyond the universe, because something that can be produced by anything within the universe is not a miracle. It's what we call natural phenomenon. It's a natural phenomenon produced within this universe. Now, people often discuss what is natural law. I mean, if something happens, if something is part of nature, then is this not called natural law? Just call it natural law. And yes, it is. But nature within the reality we live in is within this universe. So anything that happens within this universe is subject to the natural laws defined for this universe. Anything that happens outside of this universe or comes from the origins of this universe is extra natural law. It comes from beyond this universe. Now, how do we know that anything that we observe is a part of the natural law or generated from a circumstance that occurred within nature? Either it's just an effect by the sun or the product of a genius. These are natural sources for things, natural causes for things. So how do we know that something is not produced by a genius or produced by a natural effect, like flooding is produced by a lot of rain or so on and so forth? So how do we determine how do we make this kind of discrimination between these two possibilities? Well, as you know, science uses the method of repetition under the same conditions and observation. Now we know that when you look at an experiment, you see basically if something is natural, you could be able to repeat it under the same conditions. If it's not natural, then you won't be able to repeat it under the same conditions. And of course, this is how science uses the method it uses to determine truth. Now, miracles or alleged miracles can be of two kinds: empirical or rational. What I mean by empirical is something that physical happens. So you have the Dead Sea parts and Red Sea parts. And you can walk through it with the water kind of either side of you, like in that 70s film, or someone actually who is clinically dead, head chopped off, and somehow comes back to life, comes back together. That would classify as an empirical miracle, a physical miracle, which we know that under natural laws of matter doesn't do that. So matter can't do that. These are empirical miracles. But rational miracles would mean things which basically would be in observation by the mind. So, for example, if something could still be mathematical yet define mathematics, that would be a miracle. If you could do a one-move checkmate, for example, in chess, that would be a rational miracle. Even though the rules are set up by humans, we set up the rules, but if I could show that without contradicting the rules of chess, but I could demonstrate that would be a rational miracle. So the question is now, where would we classify the Quran? Well, the Quran is not an arrangement of matter in terms of rock formation or the Dead Sea, Red Sea parting. Sorry. So what is the miracle? Well, the miracle, if there is a miracle in the Quran, it would have to be a rational miracle since it's language. It's to do with its language. And a rational miracle has a number of advantages over empirical miracles. You see, miracles that breach rational laws are able to be comprehended by the person that it has broken the law. For example, if I saw someone coming back to life from the dead, I would say, but how do I know he was dead in the first place? Or if I saw the Red Sea parting, maybe that's some kind of natural phenomenon. I heard some people discussing that there was a volcanic explosion in somewhere in South Italy, and what it did is it basically, for some way or means, it caused the waters to recede in Egypt, creating an effect that looks like the waters are parting. They said that, some historians have said that that's probably what happened. It could have happened like this. How do you know? You weren't there. You can't test it. Science needs something physical to test, but we can't test empirical miracles when they happen. And even if they did happen, you could say it's just a natural effect. So let's say if I brought someone back to life from the dead, you could, an atheist would say, oh, okay, well then it is natural that people from the dead can come back to life, and they would say that's not a miracle. That's produced by the universe. I mean, they can deny it, of course, but a rational miracle. If I showed a one-move checkmate, and you obviously perceived it, you saw it, you saw me demonstrate it, you saw the rules were held onto, the rules of that game, it's harder to deny. You can't deny it, and it's reproducible. So I could keep showing it to you again and again. It doesn't have to be, 2,000 years ago it happened, so take my word for it. No need. I can just show it to you. It's here. So this is why a rational miracle is more superior than an empirical miracle. And of course, as you know, like in science, miracles should be testable and falsifiable, the falsification test. So there has to be a means to falsify it. And of course, does the Quran advance such a test? Well, as we see in Surah 2, Ayah 23, and if you're in doubt about this book, from which we have sent down to our servant, then bring one chapter like it and call on your witnesses and supporters beside God if you are truthful. So the Quran is giving a falsification test. All you have to do is imitate the like of it. Like in science, repeat it using the natural tools that you have to hand to create the same effect. And if you can do so, then it's not miraculous, it is producible within the universe. In this case, it's rationally producible. Now, to kind of test if we can imitate the Quran, a lot of people say that it's a subjective test. You probably hear, maybe those of you who've heard all of Quran lectures, have gone through the beauty of the language of the Quran. And it is very beautiful, but a person who doesn't know Arabic, a person who can't actually directly appreciate that, will say, well, isn't that just like Shakespeare? Well, that's quite beautiful, and it's in a more archaic English, so it looks much more elaborate and flowery to us, and we can't imitate that. Of course, you can imitate Shakespeare. People have. Many of his contemporaries wrote similar styles of play to him, but they weren't so famous. So you can, but isn't it just subjective, right? Isn't it just, it's a beautiful book, it's really nice, it's very beautiful, but how can you actually test? Well, we know that language has rules. Like chess, there are rules for language. And of course we know that within these rules there is style, syntax, there is grammar. These are the kind of rules which language abides by. There's also the rules of producing sound and rhythm within language. So some languages you can do certain songs a certain way, which you couldn't do in other languages, or you can write, or if you wish to do a rap, for example, rap doesn't work the same way in every language. Different languages have different kinds of ways of rhyming, and to produce the same sound, you can't actually literally translate word for word from one language to another and then put it into the same rap, and it wouldn't flow. So there are certain rules which govern each language. Now, before I go into discussion about the form of the Quran and whether this test can be falsified or not, let me explain a bit more about the context of the Quran, I suppose the content of the Quran more specifically. The Quran isn't just, it's not a book of poetry, it's not a book which uses flowery language. It talks about very real topics. This book was the centerpiece, the foundation, the cornerstone, if you will, of an entire civilization. And this civilization used this book to refer to every facet of its life, its viewpoint to life, its viewpoint to purpose in life, its viewpoint to the cosmos, its viewpoint to physics, its viewpoint to sociology, its viewpoint to psychology. So in this book you'll find discussions about law, so law for human beings. You'll find it discussing human behavior as groups and nations, which I suppose would fit into sociology. It defines human behavior as individuals, which would fit into psychology. It defines ethics and morality, so which is good, what is bad. You'll hear that being talked a lot in the Quran. It talks about history, what happened in the past, to certain historical events, which has a moral story for us to learn from. It talks about theology, the nature of God, and the nature of a deity that humans worship. It talks about metaphysical world, sometimes called the ghaib, which is the hidden, or that which is outside of this universe, would be the metaphysical world. And of course, cosmology, so it talks about the universe, talks about what caused the universe, what created the universe, how the universe came to being. It uses rational argumentation to make points, to refute falsehoods, and of course it uses emotive statements, so it is emotional statements. At the same, all this at the same time, it put this in a very emotive way. That's quite a lot of content for a book. It's a very fascinating book. I doubt there are very few books which can actually match that just in content. But that in itself doesn't make it miraculous. Obviously, if I just put a whole bunch of books on psychology, sociology, and so on, and I just stack it all together, then you could say, well, in theory, that's all one book. But just bear in mind what the content of the Quran is before we discuss its form. Now, I think one of the first aspects of the Quran is what is said in Surah Nisa, ayah 82, which said, had this Quran issued from any other book than God, then you would have found in it many contradictions. Now, the word in Arabic is not in. There's not inner contradiction. It just says contradictions in the original Arabic. And I think it means contradictions with everything, according to all the mufassirs, all the people who did the tafsir of this, commentary. So it would contradict the truth, what you see around you, the observation of the natural world. It would contradict it within itself. Its arguments would contradict each other, and it wouldn't make any sense, or at least they would have conflicting ideas. And you'll find that in most books which have ideologies or advocate ideologies, you'll see there's contradictions within some of its ideas. Now, I must say that Muslims don't convert to Islam. The majority of converts don't convert to Islam because they have witnessed the miracle of the Quran directly in the Arabic language, because we don't know the Arabic language. Most converts don't, and obviously only after convert to Islam, then I had to start learning Arabic language to see what I was talking about, and to see more what Islam is trying to say. But we didn't convert into Islam learning the Arabic language. The biggest reason, 99.9% of the reason why Muslims convert to Islam is because the Quran details a very comprehensive and cogent metaphysical system, meaning it explains everything without contradicting itself, and it makes sense. It's a viable explanation, and it seems to be explain all universal phenomena, all the phenomena you've seen in your life, your personal experience, and your experience seeing humanity as a whole, explains it with no contradictions. And as you know, if anyone studies science here, that if you take a theory from science that explains everything, and it hasn't been contradicted by any new experiment that's contradicted it, then you generally accept it, you generally go with that until proven otherwise. And that's exactly what Islam says. As a convert, I initially took on that theory knowing just my life experience and knowing what I've read and so on. And then as I went through it, I discovered that, and I questioned Islam even after becoming Muslim. I discovered it had so many more answers, and subhanAllah, it's still surprising me more answers to this day. So I can't demonstrate the cogentness of the Quran in this lecture. That would require a whole other lecture. And tomorrow I'm giving a lecture on how cogent is the Shariah, the law system of human nature, how it fits human nature. That's tomorrow. And of course, you'll need a series of lectures just to go through this one aspect of it's very cogent metaphysical system. However, if any of you wish to challenge me on this today, and I recommend you do, in question and answers, please ask me any question regarding things which you think is contradictory within Islam's explanation of reality, of everything. Now, another aspect of the content, when analysing the content, is that the Quran talks a lot about history or historical events. A lot of these events that we can't corroborate independently. So, for example, I think it was Prophet Saleh. There's no archaeological evidence to show whether this Prophet Saleh exists or not. But of course, if the Quran is from who it purports to be, then we know that history was far larger than the archaeological evidence that we have at hand. then of course that wouldn't be a problem. However, those things that we do know about, there's something very interesting. People say that the Quran borrowed from the Bible, the Gospels, and the Old Testament. And they say that because obviously the Quran is monotheistic, it talks about Christians and Jews being previous people's revelations. So the Muslims are the successors to that line of people revelation. And so they said that the Christians will say that, or the Jews will say that the Quran was just copying the ideas, copying the words from the previous revelations, copying the stories from the previous revelations. But if that's the case, if that is true, why doesn't the Quran copy the same mistakes as the previous revelations? I'll give an example. So we see in Genesis chapter 41, story of Prophet Joseph, and of course Joseph, refers to the Pharaoh as the Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh refers to himself as the Pharaoh in that recorded story. Now, historically, there was a problem because archaeologists have discovered recently that the term Pharaoh only came about in the New Kingdom of Egypt, and not in the older kingdom or middle kingdom. So it's a relatively new term, and it wouldn't probably exist at the time of Joseph. However, the verse of the Quran that refers to the prophet Joseph, he refers to the king of Egypt as Malik, the king of Egypt. But when it comes to Moses, he refers to the king of Egypt as Pharaoh, which is obviously Moses was more the time of the New Kingdom. So why did the Quran just change the term? I mean, everyone knows that the leader of Egypt in ancient times would be called a pharaoh. We thought that. And obviously historians know better, but generally the common masses throughout history always thought, yes, it was called pharaoh. So why did the Quran make an exception at that one point? But then at the time when it was showing Moses, the story of Moses, it continued using the term pharaoh like everyone else did. So why is the Quran not taking the term pharaoh? Is it because the author of it knew what the situation was back then? Let's continue. The Quran also, during its time, it made some predictions of future events. So there was a time when the Romans were fighting the Persians. Romans suffered a massive defeat. They lost Jerusalem. So the Christian capital, the religious capital, was lost under pagan control by the Persians. It was game over. Everyone thought it was game over for the Byzantine Roman Empire. But the Quran said that okay, they've lost, but in a period of 3 to 9 years, they will win back their lands and they will be victorious. And this is in response to the pagans who were taunting the Muslims, saying that we'll defeat you like our pagan co-religionists defeated your kind of monotheistic co-religionists. And of course, the Quran was proved right. Within a period of 7 years, the Romans slowly took back their lands and reconquered Jerusalem from the Persians. Interestingly enough, the word that the Quran uses is for one of those, for the land where the Romans would win against the Persians. Is obviously a close land or a near land, but also the lowest of lands. And of course, geographically speaking, the place where the Romans won a strategic battle against the Persians is actually one of the lowest lands on earth. It's in the Levant. So this is very interesting, these kind of predictions the Quran made, prophecies, which we know is what we'd expect would come from a religion or a book that purports to be revelation from God, and it was proved right. And we know that it wasn't written back, kind of retro written back into the book, because it talks in future tense. So that whoever was listening to the Quran, addressing them, it was said in future tense. So we know that it was a prophecy and trust me, at that time, you would have thought the Romans would never come back. It's like basically saying that after Japan was hit by the second nuclear bomb, it was making a prediction that not only will Japan continue fighting, it will retake Pearl Harbor and conquer a bit of California, which wouldn't be so pleasant for Arnie. Is he still the mayor there? No. So that's basically how kind of strange that prediction was at the time when you looked at the geopolitical situation. Also, the Quran, when it talks about the natural world, it uses very precise terms, very interesting terms. So In Surah 21, ayah 30, it said, did the disbelievers not see that the earth and the universe were unified, and then God rendered them asunder? Now, sure, people say, oh, this is referring to Big Bang, as in when maybe the universe was one whole and then it was rent asunder. Of course, some people try to say, no, the Quran was taken from some of this Hindu cosmology, which said that that basically the universe was one unit, a cosmic egg, and they just borrowed it from the Hindus. Well, so firstly, it's interesting to have to go all the way to the Hindus and say, well, we'll pick your cosmic theology out of everyone else. However, the Hindus don't believe that the universe is separate. They believe it's all in one cosmic egg. It's still part of one unit. So if that's incorrect, because the Hindus didn't actually have that belief. Embryology, we know about the embryology discussions in the Quran. It uses very specific terms. So when the Quran says we create you from sperm, then it says from a nutfa amshaj, which is a mixed drop. Which is obviously the combination of the sperm and the egg. Alaqa, which is something that clings, or something that's leech-like that clings, which is a blastocyte in modern English terminology. And of course, mudgha, which is a undifferentiated object of meat and so on, which is embryo. And of course, then the development of both bones and muscles until it's a new creation called a fetus in English. The Quran uses very specific terms. Now you might say that, okay, well maybe the Quran description is a little general, or he hasn't given us precise medical scientific terms. But, that's fine. But has modern scientific knowledge disproved the Quran's discussion on this issue? Because the Quran uses very specific terms. I mean, why would it use alaqa, which is something that clings, which is exactly like a blastocyte. A blastocyte, it clings to the womb. Why specifically that? Why not just every Greek thinker prior to that never talked about it being something like a leech. They said that it was perhaps some kind of a seed or pod or what have you, connected by a branch or stalk. But not something that's kind of like leeches to the side of the womb. No one ever came up with that idea. It's very precise. Why would it use that? But the people who disagree, who try to find fault with it, try to say it's too general, but it doesn't answer why it's very precisely worded. And of course, again in the Quran it describes mountains as stakes and stabilizers upon the earth. And as you know, anyone who studies geology is that basically mountains form rough, but most of the mountain is actually kind of like an iceberg. It's kind of planted in the earth's mantle. So as an iceberg, you only see a small part of the top. The biggest part of it is kind of maintaining its buoyancy, but it's basically within the mantle, which is kind of like a peg. So if you were to look at the Earth's crust and see the mountain, they'd basically be puncturing the crust, so to speak, and would be like pegs. So this is it's interesting imagery. Now the Quran is not telling us this to say, oh look, in the future, the Quran will be proved right on these issues. No. The Quran is just mentioning these things to say, oh, just observe, can't you see, this amazing world around you? Surely this world around you was created by God. But in doing that was its main intention. Its main intention was not just to say, this is some interesting knowledge which you'll find out that in the future is true. It didn't say that. The Quran doesn't say that at all. However, the wording used to describe its natural phenomenon, just for your contemplation, is very precise. That there's never any problems with modern scientific discoveries and the Quran, any of these issues. We don't face any crisis of faith on any of these issues. In fact, when the majority of scientists believed in steady state theory, which is that the universe has always remained as it is, and that was majority scientific opinion. Probably at that time, they were having a laugh at the Quran for saying, you guys believe that the universe actually changed. It was maybe one unit that it would rent asunder or what have you. This is against scientific theory. The majority of scientists don't believe this. Of course, that's until they detected redshift, which indicated an expansion, which indicated that it came from a common point of origin, which is what they call now the Big Bang. Also, the Quran, if it is borrowing from Christianity and Judaism, why not then borrow the exact same ideas and concepts and belief systems? I didn't mention it here, but Why not borrow the idea that Jesus was crucified on the cross? I mean, every Christian you'll ever meet, no matter how heterodox or heretical they are amongst Christianity, they believe that. So why go to all this? I mean, you could just say that, yeah, Jesus died, but many prophets have died in the past. Many prophets have been martyred in the past. Why you want to say now that actually everything you thought you knew about history is completely wrong, including this really big aspect? Why not borrow that? If you are a false prophet, if you want to basically get people to believe in you, just take what was commonly believed. I mean, for example, the Baha'is, who emanate from Iran, they were a sect from Iran. They didn't want to change anything of the Islamic theology. They borrowed it wholesale, everything. All they did was just add not a profit onto that. You see, and of course, Sikhism took a bit of Islam and Hinduism. But why would Islam take a stance which basically no one has ever had before, and maybe since the 200 AD when there were Gospels, and perhaps 100, 200 AD when there were Gospels purporting that Jesus wasn't actually crucified on the cross, but the Prophet Muhammad didn't have access. These were buried, only to be discovered by archaeologists, hundreds of years in the future. They were gone. Of course, this has made some people claim that Muhammad had access to a vast library, not only of medical knowledge, to do that verse on the embryology, but also he had access to old Christian manuscripts from 200 to 100 AD talking about Jesus not being crucified on the cross. The Prophet Muhammad had the most impressive library at a time when, and in an area where basically they didn't have physical books. Only the Jews had books, and they weren't books, they were those scrolls which they used to hold their Torah. So we see that basically the Quran criticizes, but again, very specific criticisms, very precise wordings. You might have read in Surah 4, and you see Surah 19, the arguments seem very similar, but they're not. When it says they do blaspheme, who say God is one of three, for there is no God except one God. This is obviously referring to Christians, but it's not addressed to Christians. But then in the second verse, in my example, it says, "O people of Scripture, do not say three. Allah is not except one ilah, one God." Why is it in the first verse, the Quran is saying there is no ilah except one ilah, which is the generic word God. And then in the second verse it says that Allah, which is a very specific word for deity in Arabic, it is not except one ilah. Why is that? Because the Quran understood the nuances of Christian theology, and this stuff was only been known by I think priests or bishops possibly. Is that the first verse is telling everybody else that Christians, in reality, they might say they don't, but in reality, if the Father is the only God the Jews worship, the one they call the Father, then to say there's a Holy Spirit and there's also Jesus is actually now adding two more things to that, which is now three gods. But the Christians don't see it that way. The Christians see it that they worship one God with three internal personalities. So then the Quran, when it speaks to the Christians, it uses much more precise wording. And it says that God, so God, Allah, which a Christian would recognize that, an Arab-speaking Christian would say, okay, Allah, the one God, is not except one ilah. So he's only composed of one. He's not composed of three. So it's very specific wording. Bear that in mind. So we've seen a lot of the different aspects of the content of the Quran. Now we're going to discuss the form of the Quran. There are three aspects to look at. There is the literary style, the density of its meaning, and its eloquence. Now the literary style basically means how sentences are constructed. And you get basically, there are two types of speech that we know of. There's straight speech, otherwise called prose, and rhythmic speech called poetry. I would say that there is a third kind, you could say, which is rhyming prose, which would also come under rhythmic speech. Now, rhythm is used in language to create emotions within the person. It's used to create, to basically make you accept that speech better. That's why when we hear music, we somehow feel we need to dance. The creating of a beat a beat will always cause human beings to kind of be affected emotionally. And speech, or rhythmic speech, creates a beat within that speech which we find receptive as human beings. Now, straight speech focuses only on the content. It looks at I mean, sure, it could be also trying to get your emotions, but it does it purely intellectually. It does it purely using, evoking concepts and ideas without the form of the speech itself also contributing to that. So it's very much as a straight speech, and I'm referring to it being very mundane, not it's referring to its sexuality. So there are natural limits that exist within both these types of speech. Now, there is basically, you could say, on a scale, there's a lot of rhythm, or there's rhythm, and then there is grammar, there is expression of ideas. The more you basically you want to make your speech rhythmic, the less it will be able to be the most efficient way of expressing ideas. This is basically, for example, look at rap. So rap is all about creating the rhythm, it's creating the sounds, creating the kind of harmonies in auditory harmonies. Now we see that to do so, to make sure that all its lines kind of flow, it will have to add words which aren't actually English language words. So create words. So it might have, just adding R's and yeah. Sometimes even adding yeahs when there is no need. It doesn't add anything to that discussion. Yeah, what? What is the yes? All right. So it will add words in the wrong places. It will make up new words like shuzumanizo, which doesn't really have any. It's not in the original English as far as I know. So. I've heard Muslims saying Islam alizo. So anyway, I've heard Muslims saying it anyway. But prose is different from that. Prose is generally more freer to express ideas. It has no limitation as to, no, I can't pick that word because that word doesn't sound as good as, it doesn't make the sentence flow as nice as another word. No, you don't care about that. You care about what is giving the most efficiency of meaning. So this is a bit of a linguistics class today, but I think you need to understand this very important difference. Now, in Arabic, prose is called mursal, and it's very, as I said, like English, it's very similar. It has no rhythmic pattern. Generally, it has no rhyme. It has a resemblance to straightforward speech, and basically, it is prose. The Qur'an does not resemble that kind of speech. Anyone who just listens to it, as the brother who intoned at the beginning of this discussion, you'll see that that's not prose. Interestingly enough, at bar mitzvahs, Jews generally have to intone parts of the Torah. The Torah is written in prose. Most of it is written in prose. Maybe the Songs of Solomon are not, but most of it is written in prose. And you can see that what they're trying to sing is just prose, but giving it some kind of a rhythm to it, or some kind of a tone. But you can hear it's prose. So it's something very mundane, and you can't really make it kind of have that rhythm. So I'm just going to use this kind of how-to guide to how to use the AMX control. And if I was trying to sing it, I'll say each source will open a different menu. Blu-ray menu will show remote control functions. See, it's just prose, right? But I'm trying to I'm trying to give it some kind of a rhythm to it, or some kind of a tone. But it's prose. I can't. There's nothing I can do about that. It's what it is. The second form of literature and speech is poetry, or shi'r. Now we know that poetry does not have to fit into grammar. Poetry doesn't care about grammar. You don't have to be grammatical when you write poetry. It's written into lines, each ordered by something called a meter. I'll explain that in a second. In most Western classical poetry traditions, the meter of verse can be described as a sequence of stressed or unstressed syllables, so in English poetry, or long short syllables in the Arabic. So I'll give an example. You have Shakespeare is written in iambic pentameter, the most common meter in English poetry. It is a sequence of 5 iambic feet, or iambs, each consisting of an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed one, which basically goes dead on. So it's like this. It's so long as men can breathe, or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. You see, there is a beat going through it, and this is a meter. So it's syllable stress. Whereas, I suppose in the Arabic, it's unlike English, it's not about stressing the syllables, it's about I guess, elongating the actual syllable itself. So when I say, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, see, this is I'm stressing the syllable. Not stressing the syllable, sorry, I'm pronouncing, elongating that syllable. So I'm just giving an example. There are different kinds of meter in Arabic. This one, for example, is tawil, and it goes with short, long, long syllables, short, long, long, short, long, long, short, long, long, and then it repeats into the next line. Of course, then you have the next kind of meter in Arabic, which is kamil, which has short, short, long, and then short, short, long, and so on and so forth until it repeats to the next line. Now, the kind of poems that will be generated using that, I will just give a translation, because I want you to pay attention to the meaning given of that poem. For example, this poem by Abdullah al Andalusi of Sind, who said of you, or thee I dream, or while spears between us were quivering, and soothe of our blood full the drop had dropped in the tawny shafts, I know not by heaven I swear. Now, sure, it's interesting, it's evocative. I suppose you're trying to imagine that he was basically in a battle, and he's in between the spear shafts pointing towards the enemy, and it's, these quivering, very, spear shafts. And of course, he was talking about how the fighting, but how he thinks about this person he's referring to. But you see, it's very emotive. There's nothing technical about that poem. It's not. I mean, you can't see that kind of writing being used to convey legal kind of concepts or political ideas. But rather, it's just a very emotive storytelling, and even not giving the full details of that story as well. Or even within that context, it's not telling him why he was there, what he was doing, and so on and so forth. It's just about this very emotive text. Now, there are 16 meters or styles in Arabic language. And this has been, I mean, there could be more, but generally speaking, these are all the 16 that have been looked at from classical Arabic. Of course, Arabic has changed since the classical time, so in this modern Arabic, there are probably a few new ones, because the Arabic has changed itself. So there are different Arabic words, and there are maybe slight changes in grammar. Now, we see that poetry generally it can have an end rhyme. So at the end of each sentence there's a rhyme, or verse, there's a rhyme, but not necessarily. It has recurrent syllabic patterns, which means the syllable stresses I was talking about earlier, they are recurring to a certain meter. It doesn't require to adhere to grammar or sentence at all. You can write it as you see fit, as long as it maybe have some emotive effect, and there is some, you can understand it somewhat, although some poetry you don't understand at all. The Qur'an is not metrical, so it does not conform to any of these syllabic patterns producible in the Arabic language. However, the Qur'an can employ some metric verses, but it fuses them with non-metric verses, which it's unprecedented in Arabic language, and the Qur'an is the only example in Arabic language of the Qur'an's own genre. Now, there is another possibility of what the Qur'an could be. What kind of human construct it could be. It could be sajja, which is what I suppose was called rhythmic prose, or a rhymed prose. But there's something very interesting. Von Defner, who wrote a book, Qur'an, he's mentioned a very interesting observation. He says the sajja is a literary form with some emphasis on rhythm and rhyme, but it's distinct from poetry. Sajja is not really as sophisticated as poetry, but has been employed by Arab poets, and is best known of the pre-Islamic Arab prosages, usually said by those soothsayers or kahanin as they're called. It is distinct from poetry, but it is lack of meter, but it shares the element of rhyme, although it can be regularly employed. Now, as I said, if you look at accent-based rhythm, again, so just so you understand what accent-based rhythm is. So looking at the English nursery rhyme, which says, bar, black sheep, have you any wool? Yes, sir, see, stresses. Again, so I want you to bear that in mind. These are accents. Now, Saj can have that. It can have that, but it doesn't need to follow a meter as long as there is rhyme, and that is in rhyme. Some of those lines rhyme. Now, I guess the question is, the Qur'an is not prose, and it's certainly not poetry. So, is it sajja? This is the rhyme prose or rhythmic prose. Is the Qur'an sajja? Now, I refer to a dissertation on this is issued by Devin J. Stewart, who wrote Sajda in the Quran, Prosody and Structure. And he looked at a detailed examination into the Quranic style and Sajda. He's not Muslim. Now, he noticed that while the available Sajda that we have from the pre-Islamic times and the post-Islamic times, he noticed that there was some very interesting issues regarding both how Sajda is used and how the Quran formulates its text. So, I'll give you an example. He sets out, he tried to find out what are the rules of Sajda. So, what makes a good Sajda construction? Or what is possible within Sajda? So, what are the rules, the laws, the rational laws with Sajda? And generally speaking, he said that great works of Sajda, like the Maqdimah and other works throughout the centuries, have rarely been able to produce 8 to 10 verses of consecutive monorhyme. Ibn Sinan al-Khafaji states that monorhymes have been used in sermons and correspondence and other writings, but adds that it is a fault to compose an entire letter of Sajda with one rhyme because it tends to be repetitive and stilted. What he's saying that basically, I could write a poem, and people said, I want 100 lines, all must be rhyming, with the same rhyme, it's the same end rhyme. So if I want to say, I heard a dog bark, I went to the park, out for a walk, right? Same end rhymes, right? Not the bit, okay, it's not Shakespeare, but that same end rhymes. Now you try to think about writing 100 lines or maybe 50 lines of that. It will be, and keeping it on subject. You have to keep it on subject, relevant to that subject, adding something to that subject, and not repeating yourself for no reason or for no reason at all. Just actually keeping it on point, like some of these rap artists try to do. And you'll find it's incredibly difficult, even in English. It is incredibly difficult. And of course, as Ibn Sinan al-Khafaji said, that basically you'll end up maybe using the same word again and again and again and again. So I'll be like, I went out to the park, I enjoyed myself in the park, it was a nice time in the park. I mean, I'm just repeating the same word again and again and again. And it's starting to be extraneous, as in I'm using now lines, not adding new information to my piece, but I'm just adding it because it sounds nice. However, he analyzed the Quran and discovered that the Quran uses monorhyme for 83 ayahs, 93 ayahs, 118 ayahs, and in some cases 206 ayahs continuous monorhyme. And may I just say that there exists no Arabic work at all for 1,400 years which has done the same. So you might say, okay, maybe in English you can't do it. But in Arabic, maybe that language makes it easier for you to make monorhymes. But then how comes there is no examples of anyone that can actually achieve that level of monorhyme? They tried, they discussed it, but you can't achieve that level of monorhyme and keep your subject on point and discussing very complex issues, as I referred to earlier in this lecture, about content, about cosmology, about legal theory, about observation of human behavior. These are very precise and very specific topics. So that's one aspect. Also, the Quran can use inexact rhymes sometimes, so it can use basically non-naturally rhyming consonants while maintaining rhythm. Basically, there are rhymes or attempted rhymes which basically Arabic compositions can't do. It's basically you will never see a poem using them because they're too difficult to rhyme and make a discourse of what we're using. So, for example, using the word that ends with atab or tab or sab, end rhyme, very difficult. Very difficult to use that in any kind of poetry. In fact, he says that he hasn't actually encountered that being used in any poetry. But we see in Surah Lahab, we see end rhymes, watab, kasab, lahab, hatab, masad. And if you read Surah Lahab, which is a very small one, it's making a point. It's actually criticizing a political figure at the time of Quraysh and making some points against him. Of course, Surah Falaq as well. So you see Falaq, halaq, waqab, uqad, hasad. These are rhymes which are used. So he said that these rhymes are not allowed in poetry, and to the best of my knowledge are not used by later writers of such. So the Quran allows inexact rhymes which are not found in other later saj'a. That's 1,400 years of Arabic composition. And as you probably, anyone who knows Islamic history knows, that there was one thing that the Muslims had excelled at was language, and very detailed discussions on language. Also, the Qur'an transcends the accent-based metrical system of sajda. Now in sajda there is, it's not metrical in terms of the poetry, there's a poetic structure, but there is a kind of metrical system. The metrical system of sajda is words, or lafza. So you must have the end rhyme being similar with a vowel which is basically pronounced and so on. So this is the kind of a law of sajda, you could say. Now this produces, I think, a natural limit to how long you can make a verse. I mean, like, how long can you make a verse of poetry when you're writing? Or a sentence can be really long if you want it to be. It'd be very hard to understand, but you can make a sentence of prose as long as you want. In poetry, if you make it too long, it's hard to read and maintain a rhythm when you're going through the poem. It's too difficult. I mean, this is a natural law of just keeping the rhythm. That's all it is. I mean, there's no one's going to stop you from writing a long verse, but when you read it back, it's not going to sound nice. I.e., the rhythm's been broken up. Now, Devin J. Stewart commented that some classical Arabic scholars didn't talk about a length for sajda, but Khafrashandi said that the limit should be 19 words, roughly. And the reason why he said 19 words is because he saw some surahs in the Quran at 19 words for each line, and thought that this is really beautiful, very amazing, and I think that you can't surpass this. Beyond that, it will become too cumbersome. However, what Devin J. Stewart said, that it's hard to find anything even near that length of even 19 in their compositions of sajda. But here's the interesting thing, that what you'll find words in Surah Baqarah, so lines in Surah Baqarah which are 15, in one case 127 word line, and 32 word line. Actually all right next to each other as well, interesting enough. And it maintains its rhythm. The rhythm is maintained. I doubt now that the Quran's challenge was the Arabic language. Arabic language has very unique limits. But I think an interesting theory is that it's the Quran doing things in language that no other language can do. I think that's an interesting theory to look at. But 127 words in a line while maintaining the rhythm. I had an example, and this example in the Arabic was Surah 74, Ayah 31, where you'll see that kind of oblong shape of an Arabic numeral is the end of each line, for those who are the uninitiated. And you'll see that it just at 31, it jumps from free to the free words to I think it's around 50 or 55 words or something. It just jumps, but the rhythm is not broken down. Now I'd like to actually ask brother if you'd be willing. Mashallah, I heard his voice is really beautiful. I would like him to recite just from top to bottom of that page. I want you to see if it sounds disjointed, like you'd imagine in English poetry. Please, brother.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وما أدراك ما سقر لا تبقي ولا تذر لواحة للبشر عليها 19 وما جعلنا أصحاب النار إلا ملائكة وما جعلنا عدتهم إلا فتنة للذين كفروا ليستيقن الذين أوتوا الكتاب ويزداد الذين آمنوا إيمانا ولا يرتاب الذين أوتوا الكتاب والمؤمنون وليقول الذين في قلوبهم مرض والكافرون ماذا أراد الله بهذا مثلا كذلك يضل الله من يشاء ويهدي من يشاء وما يعلم جنود ربك إلا هو وما هي إلا ذكرى للبشر كلا والقمر والليل إذ أدبر.
Now to those who don't know the Arabic, they probably didn't know where the end of each verses came, but it had a continuous rhythmic effect. You wouldn't know. Only if you knew Arabic, you'd know that the reason why it's this is the end of the verse here is because it rhymes. It rhymes with the end of the verse over there. So you'll see the little bashar rhymes with ashar, which is up there. And so they said, all right, that's the end of that verse. Now, what would it look like in English? Here's one of my own compositions. Please don't be bowled over by its amazing eloquence. I went outside for a lark, I heard a dog bark, then went to the park. Once I was there, I laid out my mat, took out my picnic hamper, ate some sandwiches and drank an orange juice. Then I had a nice chocolate cake for dessert. It had a pretty red cherry on top of it. I like cherries. And then went for a walk to digest my food, and in the pond I saw a shark. I enjoyed myself until it was dark, and that was the end of my lark. Sounds very disjointed in the English language and so on. So this is what it would do when you have non-matching lines of text. At least not in the same length, and of course it's just too long, But the Quran pulls it off. Also, the Quran does something, and it does all this, and as Devlin J. Stewart noticed, it uses a much smaller set of rhymes. Throughout the whole book, it uses a much smaller set of rhymes than other poets have used. This is very interesting. In essence, what it's saying is that the Quran can build, 10 times, like if it was a builder, it could build 10 times bigger the house with half the tool or a tenth of the tools, and a tenth of the materials as well. Whereas other poets, to write a book of poetry, you will use all kinds of different end rhymes, a much more varied set of end rhymes to write a book of poetry, or even sometimes even in one composition. But the Quran uses a much smaller set of end rhymes. It doesn't even need that many to write an entire book discussing all those subjects. I mean, that's like literally all the subjects you can imagine that any human being would ever be concerned about. But using a much smaller set of end rhymes. I mean, if I didn't know better, I think the Quran's showing off. So, this was commented on by some Arabic scholars who are not actually Muslim. So R.A. Nicholson has said that as regards the external feature, the style of the Quran is modeled upon Sa'd with rhyme prose, but with such freedom that it may fairly be described as original. Bruce Lawrence says, those passages from the Quran that approach Sa'd still elude all procrastinating efforts to reduce them to an alternative form of Sa'd. So texts are classified by whether they follow certain kind of forms as to whether they're poetry, prose, or sajja, rhymed, or rhythmic poetry, rhythmic prose. However, applying these laws of how to categorize things, the Quran actually doesn't fit into sajja because it can do things which sajja can't do. Putting it straight. Also, there is something which is very important to understand. You can write anything you want. Anything you want. If you're willing to compromise meaning. If you're willing to do away with meaning, you can write anything you want. Now, we see that the Kahanin, they used to use Sajj a lot. And their kind of writings of poetry would be things, like psychobabble would be the case. So they say things like, like you'd probably hear some kind of guru or mystic say, for example, like if you ascend on the wings of a dove into the skies of knowledge and sup that wisdom's full. I mean, like, what are you talking about? Whereas the Quran is mubin. In the Arabic language, it means it is clear. It doesn't use any of that flowery language at all. If literally, as English speakers here who've opened up the translation of the book of the Quran, you wouldn't even know it's any kind of a poetry. It would seem to be just a maybe at worst you could say a strange kind of prose, but it's just simple prose. It's giving legal ideas about inheritance, about family structure, about state structure, about how to judge, going to war with your enemies. It's very, you've read all the English translation of it, but it's written in the same sajja which the Kahanin could only use to make very woolly statements, which for the sake of keeping the sound of it. So, for example, I mean, you got such wonderful compositions as Sama'u al-Ard, wal-Qardu wal-Fard, wal-Ghamru wal-Bard, which means in Arabic, the sky and the earth, the loan and the debt, the flood and the trickle. What's it saying? I don't know what's it saying, right? But it is just evoking these ideas, and it was part of its kind of attempt to try to write something that's found really nice in Arabic language, and it does, but not actually saying something really concrete, something definite. It's not mubin. Of course, we know this. There's a guy at the time of Prophet Muhammad who did try to imitate the Quran, and his name was Musaylimah. Now, what he did, his little trick was that he basically used the same verse of the Quran and would change one of the words around to keep roughly the same kind of structure and say, look, I can write like the Quran. However, again, if you're gonna change things or whatever, the meaning can be compromised, and you need to maintain that meaning for it to be falsifiable. For you to claim to be falsifiable against the Quran, you have to maintain some kind of meaning that makes sense and is cogent. And his one was, a field, or the elephant. Right? So what is the elephant, and who shall tell you what the elephant is? Well, obviously anyone who's seen an elephant, but anyway, he has a ropey tail and a long trunk. This is a mere trifle of Lord's creations. Why mentioning he has a ropey tail and a long trunk? What significance is that for the issue of discussing cosmology, that you'd mention he has a ropey tail and a long trunk? Does it do anything? Is it something interesting? No, he just basically took a verse of the Quran, changed the word, put it field, means elephant, and then produced that composition and claimed he was a prophet. Apparently, when one of the Prophet's companions heard this, Omar, he said to one of the adherents of Hussein, and he goes, "What? He's calling you this?" Was his response. So this is what happens. So rap, as I said, going back to rap, it uses meaningless words and phrases at times to keep the flow of rhythm. One challenge to you is you can go online and type in rhyming dictionary, and it will, for those people who need help with trying to get rhymes. It's an interesting dictionary. Just type in a word; it'll give you all the words that rhyme with it. Try to write something yourself. Write a message out yourself using only those end rhymes. That's the challenge. Only those end rhymes, and I'll even accept slightly inexact rhymes too. Try to write something that actually makes sense, talking about a subject without repeating yourself or saying something that's unnecessary or not needed to convey your point. It is very difficult. Of course, once you go beyond probably 20 or 30 verses, it will become impossible. Now, as I said, I am aware it has been 1 hour, but this topic is, as I said, the Quran is a very big topic. I think the brothers realize we've got more than their money's worth, a bit too much. But anyway, so Muhammad Khalifa said in his book, The Authorship of the Quran, he concluded that readers familiar with Arabic poetry realize that it has long been distinguished by wazn, bahar, arud, and kafiyah, referring to meters and rhymes. Exact measures of syllabic sounds and with rhymes, which have to be strictly adhered to at the expense of grammar and shades of meaning at times. And this is categorically different from the Quranic literary style. So as I said, the Quran gives clear meanings on law, ethics, morality, history, theology, metaphysical world, cosmology, and logical arguments. There are other points where, for example, the Quran even can does modulate its tone to emphasize the emotion behind the text. And as former professor of Arabic at Hartford Seminary, Kenneth Craig, who's not Muslim, said the Quran is understood to say what it says in a separate identity with how it says it. Again, that's a big subject to go into, so I have to pass over that. So there are some conclusions. In order for it to be maintained, there must be consistency in use of syllabic meter or accentuated meter, accents, use of end rhyme, roughly matching lengths of verses, exact rhymes, and so on, or reasonable limit to the length of those rhymes, of those verses. And the Quran defies all of those linguistic limitations. However, it maintains rhythmic consistency throughout each surah nonetheless, without saying anything superfluous, different, like not necessarily or off topic, and keeping it relevant. I will actually go to, I think this is going to be the last one on the form, density of meaning. There is a Surah 2, Ayah 212. The translation, one translation in English goes, God grants sustenance without reckoning to whom He wills. Now, if I play around with the commas in English, I can produce maybe two meanings from that. So I could say, in the red, say God gives sustenance to people without accounting them for their crimes, or God gives sustenance beyond the ability of anyone to measure or count it. There are two other meanings that you can derive from that by playing with the commas, but it wouldn't make sense. One meaning would be that God gives sustenance without knowing to whom He gives it to. Another one would be that God doesn't know how much He gives. So He's not aware of how much He gives to the people He's giving it to those He's giving it to. Which would be rationally absurd to your theology if that was your objective. Now, this is what happens in English language generally. Most of us can only write words, no matter how brilliant we are, or sentences that have maybe two meanings, and the additional meanings which will be absurd or against the meaning that we're trying to convey. However, this particular verse gives 6 meanings in Arabic language. Each one is consistent, makes sense, and is relevant, and any Arab who reads it will encounter this. And one of the reasons why any Arabic speakers here would be able to agree with me is because anyone who's read the Quran in different qira'at, different modes of recitation, modes of recitation, in a way, they basically, they put commas in different places, so to speak, that's how you view it, and it gives different, it can give different meanings to the same verse. The meaning is still correct. It's still a correct meaning. And this particular verse can give 6 meanings, which I've iterated up above there. Now, I will make a copy of this available to everybody, so no need to scribble it all down. Just give an example in the English language. So let's say I was going to write a story about animals being fed at a zoo. So I say James the panda eats shoots and leaves. So he eats shoots, which comes from the ground, and leaves. So from trees or what have you, or bamboo. Then if I put commas in there, put the commas in between, I could say James the panda eats shoots and then he leaves. Of course, there is then the third possibility, which is then absurd. So James the panda eats, shoots, and then leaves, right? Which becomes absurd. And that's what you'll generally find when you try to make more than one meaning within a verse or a sentence within any language. At best, most people can try to do 2, which is called double entendres, two meanings. But generally speaking, beyond 2 meanings, 3, 4, 5 meanings would just become absurd, not relevant to what you're trying to say. Did the Quran intend those meanings? So maybe we're reading into the Quran something that the Quran hasn't intended. Well, anyone who would read those different readings of that verse will understand that they've encountered those same meanings in other parts of the Quran. So basically, the Quran agrees with all these meanings, so I should go back to it. So when it says God gives sustenance to whom He wills without answering to no one about who He gives it to, that's correct. God does not fear an end to His resources, so He doesn't need to husband His resources carefully. That's also correct. God gives sustenance to people from sources they didn't know about. That's also correct. God gives sustenance to people without accounting them for their crimes and sins yet, at least in this life. So as they say, it rains on the good and the bad, as it says. That's also correct, according to the Quran. And God gives sustenance beyond the ability of anyone to measure or count it. That's also correct. And God gives sustenance in this life to people regardless of whether they deserve it or not. That's also correct. So this is basically, that's basically the 6 possible meanings. Each one is correct in the Arabic language. Now, I think the last thing, and I'll just mention very briefly, there is something called rhetorical devices. I'm just going back to here. Okay, rhetorical devices. A rhetorical device, anyone who studies linguistics will know, is basically a way of, 2 ways of conveying a concept very strongly with emotion, or a trick you use to make a meaning or to convey a meaning. So I'll give you an example. I just wrote this myself. A pacifist said the just way is to be peaceful. I said to be peaceful to the unjust is injustice to the peaceful. right? So this was just a small composition. 22 words. There are two linguistic and rhetorical features. One is metanoia, which means I'm recalling a statement. So I recall a statement to then talk about that statement. That's a rhetorical device. And of course, accutenza is to play with words. So they use the word just and peaceful. So I use just and peaceful and do different forms of those words. So I'll say injustice or injustice and so on. So this is basically the two rhetorical features. Surat al-Kawthar has only 10 words. But it has 18 rhetorical and linguistical features which are mentioned here. Again, I will send you notes to see that. These things are all correct. It has more rhetorical and linguistic features than it has words, which I think is quite a feat. Now the effect, I suppose, of this Qur'an on many people. Ibn Khaldun said, it should be known that Arabs thought highly of poetry as a form of speech. Therefore, they made it the archives of their history and the evidence for what they considered right and wrong, the principal basis of reference for most of their sciences and wisdom. And again, we see Hamilton Gibb, who's an Arabist, put it. He says, well then, if the Quran were his own composition, the Prophet's composition, then other men should be able to rival it. Let them produce 10 verses like it. If they could not, and it's obvious they could not, then let them accept the Quran as an outstanding evidential miracle. Now he's just reiterating what the Quran is saying. But here's the interesting thing. In a nation of poets, a nation they didn't have much except their poetry. And so they excelled at it. It's like in some parts in America, you have ghettos, and you have Afro-American citizens. And they're generally impoverished. They come from very impoverished areas, unfortunately. And very interestingly enough, they developed one kind of sport they got involved in because it's free is eloquence, speech eloquence, which we call rap. We call hip hop. There's also and music. Now it's the equivalent of me going to Harlem or one of these places and basically saying I have this composition in rap and I am a prophet of God and none of you can equal me in this. You're going to get challenged. You're definitely going to get challenged. And they have rap battles. Yeah, the Arabs had their own kind of poetry battles. And they even had an Uqas fair where they basically, kind of poetry battle each other. And if you're going to now claim in this nation of people who do, rap and poetry, that your rap or your poetry is now the best and can't be equal, no one can write anything, just even one chapter like it, the smallest chapter only has 10 words, and you're false, and what you're saying is not true, then your entire career is going down the plug. Your entire career. You might as well just set yourself on alight because that's political suicide. Or if you intend to be a politician, you're gonna basically lose. Now, I think everyone would agree that Prophet Muhammad was a clever person. So why would he do that if it was his own composition? No matter how much of a genius you are, like both Beethoven and Mozart, given enough time, you could do the same. A genius just thinks faster, that's all. All he does is think faster. Given enough time, you could do the same. But no one has. According to Devlin J. Stewart, a non-Muslim Arabist, a guy who studies Arabic language, has not encountered these features in any other Arabic composition throughout history. An interesting aspect is that the Muslim scholars, in their bid to increase their eloquence of the Arabic language, they borrow tactics from the Quran. They borrow like 19 verses. That's a nice way. That's the limit for how eloquent you can make a verse. They took styles that they could find in the Quran that they could use, and they basically employed it, and they changed the way Arabic speech how they composed their literature. So they were still unable to match the Quran. It's the equivalent of me giving you cheat notes for your exam, and you still fail the exam. Now, the effect it had on its enemies. How did the pagan Arabs react to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ? Well, we all know there was a very famous poet. He was a genius, Walid bin al-Mughira, who said to his compatriots when he heard the Quran, he goes, "By God, none of you is more conversant in poetry than I. Melodious hymns and songs, and by God, never did I hear anything similar to what he says, what Prophet Muhammad has been saying. It is so sweet, it's so graceful, and it remains the summit with nothing to surpass it." However, they told him that you must find some way to take on that challenge. And he tried to. And we know what he did, because the response to what he did is still preserved in the Quran. The accusation he came up with was that it was magic of words. The Prophet Muhammad was a word magician. That when you read the words, they affect your mind and they give the impression that it is amazing and miraculous or what have you, and it bewitches you. And we know that that's what they use because the Quran is full of responses, rebuttals to that accusation. I mean, if they didn't say it, then why would the Quran be trying to refute it? No point refuting something which hasn't been said. And of course, the Quraysh, which were the tribe of the Prophet Muhammad had tactics to try to avoid this. They said, don't listen to it, start talking, start babbling as soon as he comes, raising your voices, make funny noises. Don't allow people to hear what he's saying and bewitch you with the words. Now, here's the interesting thing. The Quran has the rebuttals, and these rebuttals are here to the pagans. And it said in Surah 69, Ayah 40, and it is not the word of a poet, little do you believe, nor the word of a soothsayer, little do you remember. The interesting aspect about this is that the refutation is very interesting. Everyone knows what the rational rules of language are. If you're a poet, you know what you can do with language, you know what you can do with poetry, you know what you can do. If you're a singer, you know what you can do with a song. But if you see something that you know can't be done and you still disbelieve it, then you must have such a skeptical mindset that there's very little that you actually believe is true, it must be. And the Quran refutes this. And then it says that people say, you're like the soothsayers. And it says, well, little do you remember? Don't you remember what soothsayers, how they sound, how the meaning? They don't make much meaning. It's mostly psychobabble to achieve the effect of sound they produce by their speech. Then little do you remember. And so the Quran refutes these allegations. And another verse of the Quran, which is not here, it says, this is in Arabic, pure and clear. Mubin, and also pure. It is pure because the Quran didn't have to invent any Arabic words, like rap does. Rap has to invent English words to make the tune continue. But the Arabic in the Quran is pure Arabic. No new words were invented. Now, there are a variety of Western scholars, from Hirschfeld, from Arbuthnot, and many others, and I'll just quote Arbuthnot because he mentioned a very interesting point. He says, and though several attempts have been made to produce a word equal to, as far as elegant writing is concerned, none has yet succeeded, when he was referring to the Quran. And of course, Arab grammarian Hamilton Gibb said, as a literary monument, the Quran first stands by itself, a production unique to Arabic literature, having neither forerunners nor successors in its own idiom. So, in conclusion, what can produce such an effect? If the effect can't be produced by natural causes, by the human mind, by the Arabic language, and in some cases, and this is just a theory of course, in maybe any language, then where is the Quran coming from? Where is its origin? We discussed at the beginning of this lecture that there's, you look at if you can reproduce something, then you can determine what causes it. But if you can't reproduce the Quran in 1,400 years, during a civilization that flowered under literary scholarship, there is something different. There must be something going on here. There must be something out of the ordinary. The Quran was never hidden like the Mormon prophet Joseph Smith. He had these little plates which were apparently revealed to him by God through these angels, but he could never show anyone these plates. He used to recite from these plates. It wasn't a recitation, it was just basic prose. And of course, there's a funny story about that where the guy who was writing it down for him, his wife didn't believe that Joseph Smith was a prophet. So he said, lose what you've written down for him, and if it's in plates, then he will basically just re-dictate to you. And so he lost it. And then Joseph Smith said, because you've now lost it, God punished me by taking away that plate, conveniently. And now I have to read from another plate, where God knew in the future that you'd lose the writing, the recordings of the first plate, and he did an alternative version that might not have the exact same wording. Absolutely true. It's absolutely true. But the Quran is not hidden. It wasn't like the Bible where only the priests could read it for many hundreds of years. It was in everyone's face, so to speak. Everyone could hear it. Enemies, friends, allies, foes. Everyone could hear the Quran and take up that challenge. It was the basis for the Prophet's authority. Without the Quran being an authority and proving its authority, Islamic civilization just wouldn't exist. No one would follow it. If the Quran is false, then why would it make it the basis of your belief? And of course, there was a public witness and acceptance of the existence of the extraordinary nature of the phenomenon of the Quran. Muslims became, the Arabs became Muslim some as a combination of ideas, but most of the time they became Muslim after just hearing a few surahs of the Quran. They didn't say, that's an interesting theory, let me read some more ideas about Islam and let me consider it and see its cosmology, then I will embrace it, like what most reverts do. No, they heard one surah and they were blown away. They became Muslim on the spot. They became Muslim at the detriment of their social status, just on hearing one surah, like the Prophet's companion Umar. So that was its effect. The Quran is different from the Prophet's speech. We have the Prophet's speech in many hadith narrations. It is completely different. It never, at any point, that the Prophet Muhammad, if he was a false prophet, he slipped up and said, I'm saying this, or in his speech he's saying, don't talk to me like this, or whatever. Rather, it is always from a third person. Or if he does ask the Prophet Muhammad to say something, he will say, he'll say, and respond to these people, say this. So it's always from someone else which is telling the Prophet Muhammad what to do, or someone else telling the Muslims what to do, never from the Prophet Muhammad's own mouth, even though it would be hard to maintain that for 22 years. The required level of education, all those hidden books and all those hidden ideas such as Greek medicine or ancient Bible texts, the level of education required, even on Christian theology itself, at that time was not accessible to most people. So the Prophet Muhammad must have had the best library in the whole world in his time to have actually known this, and it just wasn't available to most people. And of course, the Prophet Muhammad is intelligent. Why would he give his enemies, who, in a nation of poets, the opportunity, the easy opportunity, not to fight him, not to undermine him with a political intrigue, fight 10 years wars with him. No, they could just sing the simple 10 words like it. Simple 10 words. And all of Islam will come crashing down. No need for wars, fightings, crusades, or jihad. None of that, just 10 words. Isn't that easy? So, I think in conclusion, the only explanation for the effect of the Quran, the phenomenon of Islam, and the phenomenon of what even non-Muslim scholars are recognizing. The non-Muslim scholars aren't saying they don't say it's miraculous, little do they believe, they just say it's such a phenomenon. They say, no one has imitated this. It's very interesting how the Quran has done this, but no one can imitate this. I said, well, what an interesting phenomenon. That's how they view it. Little do they believe, right? So there is only one conclusion. I think it's a rational conclusion. I think all the evidence bears up to it. That the only author of the Quran is from a source which is not bound by the rational laws of this universe, and the only thing that is not bound by the rational laws of this universe is the creator of this universe, and bring then a surah like unto it, and call upon whomever you can besides God if you are truthful. And surely no one has. Thank you.